Stop by like Tom Pelissero stopping by, and he's giving us a little bit of time. Looking good over there. How are you this morning?
Doing fantastic, Susie. Just got back from the combine yesterday because once they're actually talking about players on the field doing drills, that's right where my expertise runs out. So I was there for the lead up, all the news, and now glad to be here with you and my boys back there in the studio.
Tommy P!
Hey,
Let's go!
What up, G?
Did you hit the Starbucks on the way back this morning?
The funny thing is, it's not, everybody keeps saying, is that the Starbucks? It's not like a Starbucks the way that you would think about that. It's not like a self-contained building. It's basically a counter on the second floor of one of the hotels in downtown Minneapolis. It's always packed. It's just like a go-between. It's right in the skywalk there. And
like
I had bolted for dinner about 5 minutes before, so I missed all the fun.
Yeah, I was just wondering if perhaps you got a little bit of
Residual?
Fight Club residual, if you got a little something extra to see while you got your cocoa powder or your brown sugar latte.
This is one of those times, Susie, that I'm glad I'm more of a tea guy.
Me too, Tom.
Okay, you're not going to play with this one. Fine. You're no fun. Stafford, what's the latest?
Matthew Stafford and the Rams are talking again today. This has been going on for several weeks now, really good since the end of the season when it became apparent just like a year ago that Matthew Stafford was going to want a new deal to come back to the Rams. Last year, it took all the way up to the start of training camp before they were able to work something out. This time around, the thinking was they're not on the same page in terms of what the market value should be for Matthew Stafford. That's why, as I first said on the show a week ago, they had given his agent, Jimmy Sexton, permission to talk to other clubs and basically figure out, okay, if it's a trade or if it's to come back to the Rams, like what should a Matthew Stafford contract look like? And so his agents talked to a bunch of different teams. The Rams have also, from what I'm told, engaged with those teams, figured out what the trade compensation would look like. But the reality is, if you reduce this to football and what's the best chance for Matthew Stafford to have success as a football player in 2025, it's hard to argue the Giants in a division with the Super Bowl champs and Washington and Dallas, or the Raiders in a division with, some of the best coaches and quarterbacks there are in football, that gives you a better opportunity than with the Rams and a defense that's really talented up front, some young playmakers like Puka Nacua and Kyron Williams, even with Cooper Kupp on his way out of town, that's not your best opportunity to win right now at a time that, you're 37 years old. And so, this is all part of the conversation here. I think that ultimately Matthew Stafford may be willing to play for less with the Rams than he would potentially get with other teams. But this is all subject to further conversations, and ultimately everybody needs to be on the same page. The Rams can't unilaterally trade him. Stafford can't unilaterally leave. There's got to be agreement among multiple parties about exactly how this is going to play out. And I do anticipate sometime in the next 24 to 72 hours, we are going to have resolution.
And do you think that he'll end up staying? What's your gut telling you on this one?
My gut has changed several times here because the conversation has been evolving. The Giants are the team that probably can offer the most in terms of draft pick compensation and even cash. The Raiders have the allure of, starting fresh with a Super Bowl winning coach in Pete Carroll and Tom Brady running the show, a guy that Matthew Stafford bumped into in the exclusive ski resort where they both own a house in Montana recently, and maybe had a conversation. Who knows what they talked about, but maybe had a conversation about what it would look like coming to the Raiders here. It's just, the Rams, from a family standpoint, to not uproot your family, much less move to the East Coast, from a football perspective, it makes sense. But I also know, and I go back to something, Susie, that Kirk Cousins said when he was in a situation with the Vikings about a year ago. He was a free agent at the time, but the Vikings had an interest in him. It just, there was going to be a price cutoff where they weren't going to be able to keep him. And what Cousins had said was, it's not about what the dollars, it's about what the dollars represent. And I get the sense, to a certain degree, Matthew Stafford is sitting there, in the later stages of his career going, I've won a Super Bowl here. We go to the playoffs almost every year. I'm clearly the best option you've got at quarterback. You won't pay me market value. Are they going to be able to kind of get over some of that stuff? That's why, meeting face to face is going to be an important piece of this process, and it's going to drive us to have a resolution that's going to then allow the rest of this quarterback to market to play out, I would think, relatively quickly.
Yeah, and with 4 girls and with a life here and family, and it's really hard. I think people always forget that side of it, that there is so much to do with your family and whether you're comfortable and whether and he knows and they are set up. I mean, it's not like the Rams are rebuilding. I mean, they are set up in myriad ways. What about the Vikings franchise tag on Darnold? Do you think you're going to see that? Because I know the deadlines are due on Monday.
Right. Tuesday is the final cutoff, 4 p.m. Eastern time for teams to apply the franchise tag. And so you're right down to it here. He has the same agency that Matthew Stafford does. And so again, these parts are very much interconnected here. With Darnold, he's a younger player. He's 27 years old, coming off of a Pro Bowl, his best season on a one-year contract. And there's just not a lot of precedent out there for teams to let a guy like that walk for a future potential compensatory draft pick. And so, in a perfect world, I believe, based on everything that I know and understanding the dynamics here, I believe the best outcome for everyone would be Matthew Stafford comes back to Minnesota. They're able to work out some type of a deal similar to like the Baker Mayfield deal in Tampa after he went there, had a big year on a one-year contract. It wasn't a top of the market deal. It wasn't a bargain basement deal, but it was a good solid contract that gave him a 1+ year guarantee. And then, gave the Bucs the opportunity to kind of go year to year on that into the future. The difference is the Vikings have their quarterback of the future, J.J. McCarthy, already on the roster. You know that his time is coming, but there's also no precedent for a 22-year-old quarterback, first-round pick who missed his entire rookie season because of injury and all those reps to then come back. There's no track record on it. And so they've got some very unique dynamics at play here. There has been certainly real conversation about using the tag on Sam Darnold. But if you tag Darnold, you also run the risk that he could run in immediately, sign it, be due about $40 million fully guaranteed in 2025. And at a time that the Vikings also need to address the interior of their offensive line. They're trying to get Aaron Jones back. Their entire starting secondary are free agents. And then all of a sudden, if you're eating up $40 million of the cap and you don't really have any flexibility with that, that could create some challenges. I know this, the way that Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah thinks about this, he comes from a quantitative background, and it's about how do we put together a roster that is going to be championship caliber around the quarterback, whoever that might be. Last year, the answer was we're going to get Darnold for $10 million. We're going to draft somebody, and then we're going to spend the money, go out. And they had a very good free agency with Andrew Van Ginkel and Blake Cashman and Aaron Jones, among others, a bunch of impact players, Jonathan Grenard. That's how they put it together, and it worked really well, and they won 14 games. This time around, does it make sense to go out and spend 30, 35, $40 million, maybe more on Sam Darnold? Or do you go, we'll bring in Daniel Jones on a similar type of contract that Darnold had, let him duke it out in camp with J.J. McCarthy and find out what's happening? A tag and trade, Suzy, also can't be ruled out here if they feel like there's a real market. So big decisions ahead in the next 72 hours or so.
Tom Pelissero joining us here on the Rich Eisen Show. Suzy Shuster in for Rich. What do you think the Titans plan to do at number one?
It's a fantastic question. I think that the best possible outcome in the Titans' minds would be somebody comes to them with the type of offer for the number one pick that leaves them no choice, and you just have to take it and build for the future, pick up additional first-round draft picks, and then figure out how far you're dropping. Is one of those quarterbacks there at that point? Do you get the best position player available and move forward, but get significant value out of it? The issue is in this draft, I don't know, and maybe people feel different about Cam Ward by the time we get to the last week of April, but I don't know that there's a quarterback or any position player that people are just going to clamor for and want to give up multiple future first-round picks to go up a spot or two or three and take the guy. So, the Titans will have, I believe they'll take this as far into the process as they need to, continue to listen to potential offers for the number one pick. When it comes right down to it, they've got some various pressures there. They've got a new GM in Mike Borgonzi. They got a second-year coach in Brian Callahan. They had the worst record in the NFL last season. They're building a stadium. The ownership wants to have some excitement surrounding that stadium. You need to face the franchise type of player. You also need a quarterback. And there's not a lot out there in terms of quarterbacks if you're talking about free agency. Maybe in trades, maybe some of the older players who are available could be alluring there. I just believe they need to be fully convinced. And if they're not sold on Cam Ward, or if it's Shedeur, or, I still think there's a realistic possibility that one of these other quarterbacks who is throwing, Cam and Shedeur are not, but one of these quarterbacks who is throwing at the combine, whether that's Jackson Dart or Quinn Ewers, one of those guys could vault themselves into the QB2, if not the QB1 situation. If they just aren't sold on any of those guys, Travis Hunter is such a dynamic player. And Abdul Carter, obviously, he's been dealing with a couple of different injury things here of late. But if you're sold on that guy's as Chad Brinker might have referred to him as the transformational player that makes you not want to move out of that pick. If you just think that guy's the best one to take, then you sit and want to do it. I think, though, that you put yourself in a really tough spot if you take a quarterback at number one that you are not 100% sold on, because you only get one swing at these things. Very few GMs get a second opportunity to draft the franchise quarterback, even though it's Mike Borgonzi's first year. There's certainly going to be a lot of focus on how he and Chad Brinker and Brian Callahan and the rest of the brain trust there, how they navigate this thing. I do think that Travis Hunter is probably the one that we have talked about the least. I've seen all the mock drafts with Abdul Carter going number one. I've seen all of the the quarterback speculation, namely with Cam Ward. There's never been a cornerback taken number one overall in the modern draft history. But Travis Hunter is more than a cornerback. This guy could be the closest thing that we've seen in terms of a two-way player since Deion Sanders, who was his college head coach 30 years ago. If you just think this dude is so rare that he's going to be the one who can guide you forward, and then you kind of, you scrap it together, whatever you need to do with the quarterbacks, maybe look in 2026 for the QB, I think you got to really be reluctant about just saying, well, we have to get a quarterback right here at the expense of missing out on somebody who can be a generational talent.
You're 100% right. That's how I see it. I don't know how you possibly pass him if you can possibly get him. What did you think of Shedeur Sanders this morning and his comments at the Combine?
I wouldn't expect anything less from Shedeur. He's a very, very confident individual. Talking about if you don't want a franchise changer, don't take me. I've done it at two different schools. Why wouldn't I do it in the NFL again? I mean, that's exactly just from the people who had done all the background on Shedeur. Not that it's even a negative in everyone's minds, but that hyper confidence, that's a part of the makeup of Shedeur Sanders. He's not throwing at the Combine, which is not a surprise. Neither is Cam Ward. With Shedeur, a lot of what people are digging into, from just what I've heard, I haven't done my deep dives yet on the quarterback class. I like to do that after pro days and after everybody gets to spend more time with them. But the real questions going into the process were just about, what is his dominant trait? He's not the biggest guy. He doesn't have the biggest arm. He is accurate with the football. But, you watch on tape, there are a lot of sacks. Is that on the offensive line? Is that on him holding the ball, forever? How good is he at processing? I'm sure teams are grilling him on the board. Then just getting a feel. Anytime you've got a really big personality like that, particularly at quarterback, obviously Shedeur's been in the spotlight for virtually his entire life based on being Deion Sanders' son. Are you comfortable with that type of a guy being your franchise quarterback? I really do believe, Suzy, that there are going to be some variance from board to board around the NFL. QB1 maybe, but certainly in QB2, because Quinn Ewers in particular, he played almost all last season with what I was told was an oblique tear. He hurt it against Michigan. It got worse the next week, got worse and worse through the course of the season. He's finally healthy now. He's put on weight. He's up to like 215 pounds. He's been watching tape with Mike McCarthy over the past week. I talked to Mike, and he couldn't say enough good stuff about Quinn Ewers as a young man, the attentiveness. Mike said, I'm like a kid in an ice cream shop. I could talk all day, every day with this guy just about football and scheme. He's going to impress people through the interview process. Is it possible? I don't know that he's going to be QB1, but, could he end up being QB2? I think it would surprise a lot of external observers. But just talking to people within the league, if you can get past some of like the little ticky-tack injuries that Ewers has had basically every year of his career. He hasn't had major injuries, but he's had something. He's played a lot of big games, man. I know that if Rich were in the chair, he'd remember one not so fondly.
Yeah, he remembers
but,
one.
Been in the playoff twice.
He does remember one that took place in a certain big house only too well.
Exactly. I mean, he's, and he stepped up. And I mean, think of this too, Suzy. There's so many guys who, especially in the current, the modern era of college football, all Quinn Ewers heard about for 2 years was Arch Manning, and why aren't they playing him, and the constant pressure on Sark. He's just, every time the game's not going well, get Ewers out, play Arch. Quinn Ewers not only didn't transfer and run away from it, he stayed and he succeeded. I mean, that's stuff that's gonna sit well with teams. I don't know. There could be boards on which Shedeur Sanders is the number one quarterback. We're still really, really early in this process. But if I were sitting here right now and I had to give you my educated guess, Suzy, I would say that Cam Ward, by and large, is QB1 for teams. There are some questions that teams are going to need to answer on him as well. He's not the tallest guy. doesn't have the best body. I know I talked to his quarterback coach, Daryl Colbert Jr., who actually also trained Shedeur. Really rare situation where the same guy's been coaching both these guys throughout their college and even going back to high school with Shedeur. But he said, yeah, he's worked on his body. He's been really dedicated with nutritionists. So it'll be interesting to see, even though he's not throwing on the field, kind of what does he look like through the process? Because, I mean, anybody who watched one quarter of Miami football last year knows that guy can sling it. He's pretty fun to watch. And somebody's going to have a really intriguing project. It's just a matter of how high are you willing to draft him.
Yeah, and on Cam Ward, he was also flirting really heavy this morning with the Browns. I mean, a lot of compliments on their offensive line, and he's laying it on thick there. He was performing exactly as he should be at the microphone. What do you got, Brockman?
Yeah, speaking of the Browns, look, Tom, are the Eagles really going to get Myles Garrett? Like, this is stupid. We can't let them do this. Howie Roseman is turning into the Heisenberg. He can't keep getting away with this. Is this going to happen?
I would just tell you this, Brockman. I talked to everyone I could at the Combine about Myles Garrett and all the top stories. But Myles is a really unique one because you're talking about an absolute superstar, maybe the best in the league, former defensive player of the year, 30 years old. He's got good years left. And the Browns, as I said the day that he made the trade request, the Browns stand ready to make him the highest paid non-quarterback. This is not about money. Myles does not want to be in Cleveland. The Browns, though, every time they've been asked, and when people have talked to Andrew Berry, when they've called, if they call, they don't get a call back. If they talk to Andrew Berry in person, Berry makes abundantly clear, I am not trading him. There's still time for things to evolve, conversations to occur. I would say the real touchstone, yeah, you'd like to, from a dollars perspective, you would like to think if you're getting Myles Garrett, you're doing it before free agency, just so you don't have to spend on a different edge player. You don't have to, you've got, you know that you don't have to conserve the cap resources to potentially get them later. But the real cutoff in my mind would be the draft, because if the Browns were to change their minds, because again, right now, they are not trading Myles Garrett. If they were to change their minds, I would certainly think that would occur ideally before the draft, because otherwise, if you're trading Myles Garrett, you're talking about multiple first-round picks as the starting point. Well, first-round picks in 2026 and 2027 don't help the 2025 Browns, who need all the help that they can get here. If they're going to bend on this, I would think that potentially it could be a draft week thing sometime as we get closer to late April. I would say, again, ideally you'd like to resolve it before the start of free agency, but in the Browns' mind, at least in Andrew Berry's mind, there already is a resolution, which is I'm not trading the guy. We got him under contract for 2 more years. He's not going to sit out. He's not going to, he wants to be a Hall of Famer. He's probably headed that direction. He's not going to sit out games. We're going to sit and wait, and we're going to do other things that maybe help convince Myles to get back in the fold. Obviously, neither side, they're both dug in on opposite ends of the spectrum right now, and we'll see as these coming weeks play out whether or not that changes.
I mean, I'm just shaking my head here because
But the Eagles, like, come on.
Don't be so bitter. Come on.
Well, remember this,
I
too.
picked them to win. I'm just saying.
Beyond that, if you're the Eagles, and I'm not saying the Eagles shouldn't explore it. Howie's in on every deal. That's the one thing. Anytime there's rumors like the Eagles are interested in Myles Garrett, the Eagles would be interested in any player who plausibly becomes available. And Howie's always going to call. He's always going to say, hey, let me know if you end up doing something here. And everybody knows they get that call from Howie. It's not that he's not serious. It's that he always wants to know what's happening just in case there's an opportunity. He doesn't want to not get the call and be like, dude, why didn't you call me?
Right.
I might have been in on that.
Sure.
So I would anticipate he asked. But remember, Howie is drafted unbelievably well in recent years. I mean, look no further than the Super Bowl when they manhandled the Chiefs on both sides of the football. It's because of the investment they've made in the offensive and defensive line, the number of high picks here. Eventually, you got to pay Jalen Carter. You got to maybe pay. We'll see what happens with Milton Williams, who's going to get a bag in free agency. You got to pay maybe Zach Bond. I know they'd like to pay Zach Bond, but can they actually get that done? At some point, it's like all that additional money to go and get Myles Garrett. I'm not saying it's impossible, but you're talking about really, bending physics here in terms of the salary cap. So, it's the same thing with the Lions. I know that everybody keeps going, the Lions going to get Myles Garrett. Well, they're going to have another $35 million a year pass rusher in Aiden Hutchinson in the not too distant future. He's eligible for a contract extension right now. And I would think Detroit at least has to give mind to, we should do this deal before Myles and Micah Parsons and Max Crosby and TJ Watt and maybe Trey Henderson all get 35 plus, because that's going to be even more expensive. No team I'm aware of has 2 $35 million pass rushers on their team. You just have to remember that in terms of the way the cap is set up. And yes, you can manipulate it, but the cap is real. Every dollar you spend hits the salary cap eventually here. Again, nothing's impossible. There are ways to work it. I've just never seen a team invest that much money, particularly teams like the Eagles and Lions who have homegrown guys that they're going to pay.
Tom, thanks as always for your time.
You got it.
Grande
See you next
latte
week.
for
Thanks,
you.
Suzy.
Catch the Rich Eisen Show live weekdays from 12 to 3 p.m. Eastern on Roku Sports Channel in the U.S.